The medieval castle is perhaps the most iconic symbol of the Middle Ages. A fortress of stone rising from hillsides, commanding rivers or looming over villages. Both a home and a bastion of power. But castles were not simply built to impress or intimidate. They were feats of engineering, the product of careful planning, skilled labour, and decades of experience. Constructing a medieval castle was a monumental undertaking that required knowledge of architecture, access to materials, mastery of labour organisation, intricate defence planning, and clever engineering solutions. To understand the complexity of castle construction is to glimpse the ingenuity, ambition, and sometimes sheer stubbornness of medieval society. Every great castle began not with a stone, but with an idea, where and why it should be built. Location was crucial. Castle builders sought high ground, river bends, or cliff edges, using the natural landscape to enhance defences. A hilltop offered visibility over approaching enemies, while a river could act as a natural moat. Sometimes castles were built on strategic trade routes or at borders to assert dominance and control. Planners had to balance defence with accessibility. The castle needed to be reachable for supply caravans, yet difficult for enemies to assault. Before any stone was laid, a medieval architect, often a master mason, would survey the land, sketch plans, and calculate dimensions. Some castles, especially motte and bailey designs, began as wooden structures on raised earthworks, gradually replaced by stone keeps over decades. The planning stage set the tone for everything that followed. An error in location or design could make a castle vulnerable or render construction impossible. The architecture of a castle was both functional and symbolic. At its heart stood the keep, or donjon, a multi-storey stone tower that served as the last refuge in case of attack. The keep was often the residence of the lord and his family, combining domestic comfort with defensibility. Surrounding it were curtain walls, thick and tall, punctuated by towers that allowed defenders to flank attackers. Walls were designed with battlements, crenellations, and arrow slits to allow archers to fire safely while remaining protected. Spiral staircases within towers were carefully designed, typically winding clockwise so that right-handed defenders had more room to swing swords while attackers struggled in tight turns. Gatehouses were fortified with portcullises, heavy doors, and sometimes murder holes through which defenders could pour boiling oil or hurl stones. Every architectural feature was a balance of utility and deterrence. A castle was meant to project power while being nearly impregnable.
The choice and transport of materials were monumental tasks. Stone was the backbone of a castle's strength, but it was heavy and difficult to shape. Builders sourced local quarries whenever possible to reduce transport challenges, although high-quality stone for corners, keeps, or decorative elements was sometimes imported from miles away. Timber was used for scaffolding, hoardings, temporary wooden defences on walls, and roofs. Mortar, often a mixture of lime and sand, bound the stones together, but it had to be carefully prepared and allowed to cure, sometimes slowing construction for months. Metal was essential for gates, portcullises, hinges, and nails, requiring skilled blacksmiths to forge components that could withstand the stress of use and attack. Transporting these materials was no small feat. Massive stones were rolled on logs, hauled by oxen, or floated down rivers, and construction often paused in winter when rivers froze and roads became impassable. A castle's construction site was a bustling community of labourers, craftsmen, and specialists. Master masons designed and supervised the stonework, ensuring structural integrity and architectural precision. Carpenters built scaffolding, hoardings, and wooden roofs. Blacksmiths forged metal tools and defensive fixtures. Unskilled labourers, peasants, serfs, and sometimes prisoners, hauled stones, mixed mortar, and dug ditches for moats. Guilds oversaw training, maintaining standards of workmanship. The workforce had to be organised, with supervisors allocating tasks, keeping schedules, and monitoring quality. The sheer manpower required was staggering. A single large castle could employ hundreds of people for decades, with construction continuing in stages as resources and labour became available. Workers faced dangerous conditions: falls from scaffolding, collapsing walls, and injuries from tools were common. Castle builders were master engineers, long before formal science existed. Foundations had to bear thousands of tons of stone. Builders dug trenches and laid carefully levelled stone courses, sometimes embedding wooden piles in marshy soil to prevent subsidence. Walls were often tapered, thicker at the base and thinner at the top, to distribute weight and resist battering. Buttresses, arches, and vaulted ceilings allowed architects to build higher and more durable structures. Towers were reinforced with internal walls, spiral staircases, and corner stones placed with precision. Engineers also had to consider drainage, directing rainwater away from walls and foundations to prevent erosion. The combination of empirical knowledge, observation, and trial and error produced castles that could withstand centuries of weather, siege, and even earthquakes in some regions.
Defence was the guiding principle of castle construction. Every aspect of design had a military purpose. Arrow slits allowed defenders to fire arrows while remaining nearly invisible targets. Battlements provided cover and firing positions. Gatehouses acted as choke points, defended by murder holes and drawbridges. Hoardings, wooden extensions on walls, allowed defenders to drop projectiles on attackers at the base of the wall. Moats, sometimes dry and sometimes flooded, added a further layer of protection. Engineers even designed sloped walls, known as talus, to make scaling difficult. Some castles incorporated concentric walls, multiple layers of fortifications, so if attackers breached one wall, they faced another. Siege-proof design was both an art and a science, with architects constantly innovating to stay ahead of evolving offensive tactics. Construction rarely went smoothly. Winter halted work due to frozen mortar and snow-blocked roads. Supplies ran short, forcing builders to improvise with local materials. Sometimes labour disputes or shortages slowed progress, and funding could dry up if lords were at war or impoverished. Enemy attacks could interrupt construction, particularly in border regions or during civil wars. Medieval builders also had to adapt to changing military technology. Later castles incorporated thicker walls and rounded towers to withstand cannon fire. Adaptation wasn't limited to defence. Castle designers considered comfort, adding chapels, halls, kitchens and gardens, creating a fortress that could also serve as a noble residence. Though castles were designed primarily for defence, they were also homes. Lords and ladies required living spaces with privacy, heating and storage. Kitchens had massive hearths, while storerooms preserved food in barrels and cellars. Sleeping chambers had tapestries to insulate walls, wooden floors, and sometimes raised beds. Bathrooms were primitive, often chamber pots emptied via garderobes into moats or ditches. Castle interiors reflected status as well as utility, with tapestries, heraldic banners, and carved furniture signalling wealth and power. Even in these domestic aspects, construction required skill. Fireplaces had to vent smoke without compromising walls. Wooden floors had to bear heavy traffic,
and gardens needed terraces and irrigation systems. Many castles became associated with legends, secret passages, hidden treasures, and cursed chambers. Stories of construction accidents, collapsed walls, or haunted towers spread among workers and villagers. Some castles were said to be built overnight through magical means, reflecting the awe inspired by their scale. Whether fact or fiction, these tales reveal the mystery and prestige of castle building in the medieval imagination. Master masons themselves often became legendary, their names recorded in chronicles for generations.
Medieval castle construction left a lasting legacy. Beyond military and residential purposes, castles symbolise power, wealth, and technological prowess. Ruins today speak of the ingenuity of their builders. Massive stones precisely cut, walls still standing after centuries, moats and tunnels surviving long after the original forests have grown back. Castles inspired future architecture, influenced town planning, and shaped the social hierarchy. Understanding their construction gives insight not only into engineering, but into the medieval mind, their values, priorities, and relentless pursuit of security and dominance. The construction of a medieval castle was far more than stacking stones. It was a delicate balance of architecture, materials, labour, engineering, and defence, combined with vision, planning, and human endurance. Every wall, tower, and gate reflected careful thought, skilled hands, and a constant eye on potential threats. Medieval castles are remarkable not just for their size or beauty, but for the engineering secrets, creative solutions, and sheer human effort that went into them. They remind us that the Middle Ages, often seen as a dark period, were rich in practical innovation, technical skill, and ambitious human imagination. Each castle tells a story, not just of battles and lords, but of the countless masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, and labourers who, stone by stone, built the foundations of medieval Europe.